So, when you hear the phrase migrant woman, what's the first image that pops into your head? For a lot of us, it's a single story, right? Usually one about crisis or hardship. But that's just one page in a massive, complicated book. Today, we're going to flip through some of those other pages and explore the huge range of stories that really define what it means to be a woman on the move. And let's be clear, some stories absolutely start in the darkest of places. I mean, listen to this quote. That comes from a 52-year-old woman from Peru who's now a care assistant in Italy. For her, leaving home wasn't some grand adventure. It wasn't even a choice. It was a desperate, last-ditch effort to survive. But, and this is so important, that is not the only story, not by a long shot. You know, for every woman who is pushed out of her home by violence or poverty, there's another who is pulled towards something new, ambition, a better education, or hey, just the desire for a totally different life. The story of female migration is, well, it's millions of different stories. And to get a handle on them, we really need to understand what gets them started. So, let's break it down. When we talk about why people move, especially women, it really boils down to two big ideas: push factors and pull factors. Think of it like a spectrum, or maybe two sides of the same coin. On one side, you've got push factors. These are the things that, well, push you out the door. We're talking about things like poverty, violence, no way to get ahead. Then, on the other side, you've got pull factors. These are the positive things, the opportunities that call to you from another country, a great job, a university you've always dreamed of, or just the chance for personal growth. And the reality of those push factors can be incredibly harsh. Take this study of migrant family care assistants in Italy. What they found was pretty shocking. Every single woman they interviewed had left her home country to escape a life of poverty, and often violence. For them, it wasn't about wanting something more, it was about needing to survive. Okay, now let's flip the script completely. Check this out. This is a quote from a 32-year-old woman from the UK who decided to move to Bangkok. For her, it wasn't an escape at all. It was a choice, a proactive move driven by those pull factors. She was looking for a fulfilling job, more freedom, a better quality of life. I mean, you can't get much more different than that, right?
All right, so we've seen that women arrive for all sorts of reasons. But what happens once they've unpacked their bags? What's the economic reality they're walking into? Let's dig into that.
Okay, take a look at this number. 76 hours a week. That is just staggering. That's what the migrant care assistants in that Italian study reported as their average work week. Let's put that in perspective. That's like working 2 full-time jobs. Now, the study is careful to note this might reflect the sheer burden of being a live-in caregiver on call 24/7, but it also raises a huge red flag about potentially exploitative and completely irregular working conditions. And this brings us to a huge, often heartbreaking problem called de-skilling. It's when highly qualified women arrive in a new country and end up in jobs far below their skill level. Get this, in that same study, 20%, 1 in 5 of these caregivers had a bachelor's or even a master's degree. You've got dentists, engineers, nurses, people with incredible expertise who suddenly find their qualifications mean nothing because of bureaucracy. And it's not just a personal tragedy for them, it's a huge loss for the new country too. All that talent just goes to waste. Now, if we zoom out and look at the bigger picture, say in a country like Germany, it looks pretty good at first. You see that over 92% of women are employed. That's great. But look closer at the chart. See that tiny slice for employers? Just 2.4%. It tells a story, doesn't it? It suggests there's a kind of glass ceiling. There are real barriers, like getting a loan or not having the right connections, that make it incredibly tough for these women to not just get a job, but to create jobs and become leaders. And for the most vulnerable women, the situation is even tougher. Across the entire EU, the employment rate for refugee men is around 62%. For refugee women, it drops to just 45%. That's a huge gap. Researchers have a name for this. They call it a triple disadvantage. You face hurdles for being a woman, hurdles for being a migrant, and hurdles for being a refugee. It's an uphill battle on 3 fronts. Of course, these challenges aren't just about finding a job or getting a promotion. Building a life from scratch in a new place, that takes a personal and social toll too. So how do women adapt? Well, one fascinating strategy that's emerged is something called mompreneurship. It's exactly what it sounds like. Women, often while they're on maternity leave, start their own businesses. On the surface, that sounds super empowering, right? And it can be. But a big European study points out that for many, it's less of a choice and more of a necessity. It's a way to create the kind of flexibility that the traditional job market just doesn't offer to mothers. But here's the catch. That flexibility comes at a steep price. As this entrepreneur from Hungary puts it, being your own boss means you're always on the clock. You're working nights, you're working weekends. The trade-off is way more work and way less free time. And that can lead to feeling really isolated, to what she calls an unfulfilled private life. And that feeling of isolation is a real problem for so many people, especially for women who move for their careers. It's just plain hard to build a personal life in a new place. Now, I want to be clear. This next chart isn't from a formal academic study, it's from an online discussion. But it taps into a real anxiety that a lot of professional women talk about. It seems to show that finding a partner can get statistically harder as you get older, and it just highlights that tough balancing act between a demanding global career and personal goals. Okay, so we've laid out some pretty complex challenges, right? They're economic, they're social, they're deeply personal. The big question is, what's the path forward? What can we actually do about all this? Well, policymakers are trying to tackle this head-on. The European Institute for Gender Equality has zeroed in on 4 key areas. First, tackling that de-skilling problem we talked about. Second, making sure family reunification policies work so women don't have to choose between their family and their career. Third, improving access to protection for those who need it. And finally, fighting gender-based violence, which, as we know, is often the very thing that pushes women to leave in the first place. And there's a really crucial shift in thinking happening at the global level, too. The Global Compact for Migration is pushing for a new approach, to stop looking at migrant women only as victims. The idea is to recognize their agency, their resilience, their power, and all the incredible contributions they make. It's a fundamental move away from just protection and towards real empowerment. So, what does that empowerment actually look like in practice? Well, when you pull together the findings from a bunch of different studies, a really clear roadmap starts to appear. It's about offering mentorship from people who've been there. It's about teaching practical financial skills, the hard knowledge of business plans and pricing. It's about building networks so people have a support system. And of course, it's about providing good language courses. It's not rocket science, right? It's about giving women the tools they need to build their own success on their own terms. You know, when you strip it all away, all of these different stories of struggle, of success, of impossible choices, and incredible survival, they're all really about one thing. They're about the fundamental human search for a place to belong, a place to call home. So from that care assistant who had to flee Peru to the entrepreneur designing her own life in Bangkok, every single one of these journeys challenges how we think about community and identity. And it leaves us with a pretty big question to think about. In a world where more and more of us are on the move, what does it really mean to belong?